Started January with Hopscotch by Julio Cortázar. If you're unfamiliar with this book, there are two ways to read it. You're supposed to read from the beginning through chapter 55, which is about 350 pages, and then you're supposed to begin again, starting with chapter 73, and then following in an order which is indicated by numbers at the end of the chapters. So here at the end of chapter 22, you go to chapter 62. This book's about a man named Horacio Oliveira and his relationship with a woman called La Maga. He lives as an expat from Argentina, living in Paris, and he has found himself in a circle of very pretentious intellectuals. And the first part of the book details the relationship with La Maga and with this group of intellectuals, and then the fallout that inevitably follows. The second part of the book shows his return to Argentina and his sort of coming to grips with everything he experienced in Paris. This book's a really big deal. A lot of people love this book, but also a lot of people have a lot of gripes with this book, and I have to count myself among the latter. I found myself struggling not to really resent this book by the end of the second reading. So reading the book in the traditional manner, reading through the first 55 chapters, I found myself, it's really interesting, and Cortázar's writing is really obtuse and surreal, and it deals with a lot of heady themes. He references a lot of literary works and uses them to sort of drop in a lot of ideas that he's feeding off of. And so it also makes it quite plain where the literary inspirations are coming from through a lot of this book. But I found it, not quite to my taste, I would say. As I made my way towards the end of the first reading, I found myself appreciating Cortázar's intelligence and his prose, his ability to manipulate prose in a really interesting and artistic way, but it wasn't something that is necessarily my bag. It's not something that I was totally in love with. The second reading, the Hopscotch reading, Hopscotch plays a role in the book as this idea that in the traditional, I suppose, Argentinian game of hopscotch, at the end of the game, the final position that you hop to, this is heaven. And so you're sort of making these arbitrary jumps, following a path that isn't necessarily straight, and then ultimately there's some sort of salvation of sorts. We see this jumping back and forth thematically with Horacio as well. He's constantly dealing with this sort of dual existence, and he's sort of in search of some absolute, some sort of unity. Early on in the book, he remarks that every time you make an action, there is necessarily the creation of a lack, this sort of shadow duplicate inaction. All the things that you didn't do are created and then instantly lost in every time you choose to do anything at all. This idea of bouncing back and forth and trying to navigate and find an ultimate unity. This is where this sort of comes through in the book, and so Cortázar is using the physical book, the reading experience as well, to replicate that. At the same time, he has La Maga, who really serves as this mirror who she is intentionally left out of this circle of intellectuals. All of their theorizing and postulating, it just bounces back off of her. They don't stick with her. There's no concept of order and disorder. These things, they don't have any meaning for La Maga. She's sort of living this existence that is sort of above and below. It sort of transcends all of this crap that they're thinking about. But again, we have this duplication. We have this mirror, right? We have the order and the disorder. We have the idea and the lack of idea. So all of this is really interesting, and the idea of having this book jump back and forth is intriguing and exciting. But I found the second reading, the Hopscotch reading, it adds more context for some of the events, and it adds details concerning a writer figure who the characters are interested in, and it gets really into a lot of discussions about the significance of literature and the significance of art. But if you look at the order here, the Hopscotch order, the additional chapters, which Cortázar calls expendable in this introduction here. The original 55 chapters, you still read them in order. So you're still reading the first novel in order as it's written, just with other chapters interspersed. And I just found that in the second reading, there was no enlightenment regarding the first reading that isn't negated by the second reading. I feel that nothing that I gleaned about the first reading made the effort of reading the thing again seem meaningful at all, you know? I just really found myself struggling towards the end of the second reading of this book. So if you're like me and you're thinking about reading this book at all, but the idea of reading the same thing twice is sort of off-putting to you, if you read the first 4 or 5 chapters and it's not totally your thing, might be sacrilege, but I think you could just read the Hopscotch style off the bat, and I don't know how much would be lost. You know, that's the part that I've been having trouble seeing as I think about the book is, I'm waiting to find the justification for the first reading in light of having finished the second reading, I don't see it so much. I needed something short and sweet after that, so I read Fresno Stories by William Saroyan. Saroyan is an American writer of Armenian heritage who writes about California as he sort of experienced it growing up in the first half of the 20th century. The stories here are split into 2 parts. There are early stories, which are a little more experimental and punchy. They don't have quotation marks. There's a lot of dialogue. And the second part is later stories, which are sort of like a loosely connected set of stories revolving around this one Armenian family and the various family members and their eccentricities and experiences. The big selling point for Saroyan is his writing of children characters are very believable and sympathetic. He unlocks a lot of things about small town life and the immigrant experience by writing about children. The other thing is that he paints a picture of an America that is very humorous and optimistic. Certainly there are dark moments in these stories, but it is not out of a desire to make the reader aware of all of the negativity in society. It's more about the experience of growing up and living around people who live and die and fall in love and fall out of love. The reality of that is always sentimental and moving. And I really like Saroyan. I read The Human Comedy last year, which was a great novel. He's kind of in the tradition of like a Mark Twain. I think he's underread, but he's translated into Japanese and enjoyed out here. So I find a lot of his stuff at the used bookstores here. So this was a really nice one to try. I read Always Crashing in the Same Car by Lance Olsen, which is his novel about the life and death of David Bowie. And I read this book around the 10th anniversary of Bowie's death. This was an idea I had from the moment I heard about this book. I would consider this book to be a collage novel. It uses David Bowie's voice. It has more like traditional expositional chapters dealing with his sort of discovery of his illness and his trips to the doctor. And then there are bits in here that reminded me of David Markson with all of the principal figures in Bowie's life and their significance and the way they come in and out. These sort of brief, punctuated, almost like epigraphs of information, like tidbits. There are 2 interview chapters in the book, which sort of mirror each other. One of them is an interview with Bowie's first wife, Angie, in this chapter, we read her answers to the questions, but we don't read the questions. And then there's another interview later with David himself, in which we read the questions, but we don't read the answers. And then there are two chapters towards the end of the book dealing with his wife Iman and their relationship. Bowie is obviously infamous for his multiple personas and his ever-evolving, ever-changing, transformations, these different masks and characters he would play. And identity is really the big thing in this novel, the way that we perceive others and the way that others perceive us, and the amount of agency one has in controlling that, whether or not one should be particularly concerned with identity and persona. Of course, this is a really interesting thing to explore, and David Bowie just happens to be like the perfect figure to really like grab onto this and really sink into it and consider the implications of having multiple personas and this idea of perception. I think this is really embodied in the last two sections of this book, where we are getting perspective into Iman, David Bowie's wife, who is visiting him when he is quite sick and is sort of speaking to him on his deathbed. And in one chapter, we get a very cynical depiction of this conversation, in which their relationship is entirely opportunistic and more made on evolving their careers and allowing for success financially together. And then another chapter, which is far more romantic and this sort of idyllic romance that is really what is portrayed when you see like stories and when you read about their relationship. They really do have this like lovey-dovey origin story to them. And so balancing between both, and maybe both are equally true and both are equally false, like Olsen does an amazing job here. I thought this book was absolutely fantastic, moving and profound, and the style it's always changing. He uses as many styles as Bowie has personas in this book, and that's got to be on purpose, right? Like the style of the prose, the style of the way that information is being delivered, it changes constantly. You're never this book is many different books, and of course it's altogether one great book about David Bowie. After that, I read The Dark Brain of Piranesi by Marguerite Yourcenar. I've got this really cool old hardcover, and I really love this brown cover with this Piranesi illustration on the cover. This is a series of essays from Yourcenar, and as usual, she has played a part in the translation of these, as she has with her novels that I've read. And I think that's really key. Her language is very idiosyncratic. She uses a lot of words that I've never heard before, and but she repeats them constantly. So they must be part of her vocabulary in French, and she is just making sure that they withstand the translation process. Her writing is very traditional and sort of classically trained. She's very well versed in history and the classics, and that comes through here as well. She's remarkably well read and educated. So some of the topics here are, of course, The Dark Brain of Piranesi, the artist and engraver, and his illustrations of Rome and how they became sort of the go-to depiction, sort of the mental image of Rome when all of these people were beginning to go on the so-called Grand Tour and make their way to see all of the sights. It was Piranesi's images that they had in their mind as they were making their way there. All of this is a little bit subverted by his later dream-like illustrations, much like the one on the cover here, which is predictive of surrealist art. There's a wonderful essay in here about the poet C.P. Cavafy, as well as a great essay at the end about Thomas Mann. So two writers I really enjoy. And I think you can get a collection of Cavafy's poems with this introduction included, which might be something cool to look out for. The essay that surprised me the most and that I enjoyed the most was this one, À mon beau château, which is about this one house in the French countryside, this one manor, and she sort of traces the lineage of this house from its construction through various, passages of land rights in marriage and sort of land being reclaimed by the crown. The house being discussed here is Chenonceaux, I think. Maybe that's how you say that. And it, through the course of history, was home and residence to a lot of significant figures of French history. Diane de Poitiers, who was a notorious French beauty, Catherine de Medicis, the philosopher and novelist Rousseau, and as well as Flaubert, who spent some time at the chateau as well. Really interesting bit of writing, historical writing that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed a lot of the essays here, but I think Yourcenar's style is it's a little dry and academic, so that might put some folks off from this. But I found them quite enjoyable. After that, I read Thousand Cranes by Yasunari Kawabata. I love Kawabata. Look at him. I just changed my channel logo to be a cute little illustration of him that I found online. This novel's about a man whose father has passed away, and his sort of involvement with his father's circle revolving around the tea ceremony, the traditional tea ceremony in Japan. He attends a party thrown by his father's tea mistress and one time true mistress, and he is reacquainted with various people from his past, and he becomes involved in relationships with his father's another one of his father's mistresses, and the daughter of that woman, and a lot of intermingling of generation and romance, and the sort of weight of inheritance as a physical object, like this physical tea bowls that have been passed down for generations, but also genetic inheritance and resemblance to parents, and the way coming together with a parent's lover, and the way that the parent reemerges from in the offspring. Very interesting interesting stuff that Kawabata deals with his traditional beauty and precise emotional resonance. There's this sort of 2 or 3 failed, doomed relationships at the center of this book. There's a lot of discussion about guilt. Guilt is also something that seems as if it can be passed down from generation to generation. Guilt is something that you can take on, from a relative who has died. And as always, he shows to be a master of understanding traditional Japanese iconography and traditions, and using these as jumping off points for conflicts in modern Japan. The ways that the tea ceremony and its intricacies are echoed in the intricacies of the relationships. Another character at the heart of this book is this matchmaker woman who our narrator Kikuji sees when he is young, with her breast bared, and she has this giant birthmark on her breast, and this is sort of like a mark for life, sort of ostracizing this woman. And this woman is constantly haunting him and causing him anxiety and forcing her way into his life. And this marked woman, wondering if this mark is transferable, her relationship with his father, wondering if this can be passed on, and just very interesting stuff. I love Kawabata a lot, and this book is a great one. It's a short one. I think it would be nice to read as a first novel, although I don't think it ranks among his like highest level stuff. Still very, very good. 1,000 Cranes. The last book I have to talk about is The Gift by Vladimir Nabokov. This is another one from my 2026 goals video. This is my like 6th or 7th Nabokov, and it's perhaps the most challenging one of his books that I've read. This book is not easy, but it certainly has a lot of enjoyment. There's enjoyment to be found if you can give it a chance. There's a lot to be said about the work you put into reading a book and the things you can get out of it, and finding the right balance as you're reading is not always easy, but I think I found a lot to enjoy when I was reading The Gift. The Gift is Nabokov's last novel written in Russian while he was living in Germany. And it deals exactly with that topic, with being a Russian emigre in Berlin, surrounded by other Russians, and the literary circle, the sort of small literary circle within that emigre community. Our main character here, Fyodor Godunov-Cherdintsev, is the sort of writer figure here, and he's just completed his first book of poems, which are quite poor. And the first chapter plays out as sort of this prolonged imaginary critique of those poems, and he sort of he takes the liberty of imagining kind of the ideal critic, you know, the person who is the perfect reader, reading his poems and the insights that they would be able to provide. This book is 5 long chapters, and each chapter is different thematically, and they sort of all build together to this big climax at the end. The second chapter is about Fyodor's childhood and especially his relationship with his father, who is this like adventurer, travel writer, and this is where you got a lot of Nabokov's interest in butterflies. He sort of is a butterfly researcher. The third chapter is more about his relationship with this woman named Zina, and they're sort of build their relationship together, building up to this composition of this love poem. And then we get the 4th chapter, which is crazy. It's a book within a book. It is Fyodor's biography of the sort of like Bolshevist, like proto-Bolshevist figure, Nikolai Chernitsev, who is a real guy who wrote some stuff, wrote some philosophy, wrote a couple unfinished novels and stories, and he was much admired by Lenin, among others, and he was not admired by some of the other literary figures, like I think Dostoevsky in particular. This is like a 90-page biography of this guy. You can see the letters are really small. The font is quite small, and there are these big, bulky paragraphs. Nabokov, as usual, is writing incredibly brilliantly, but I would not call him succinct. He's also endlessly playing games with the reader. This is there's a book within the book, but the writer, Fyodor, like The Gift, this might be the book that he is eventually going to write in the end, as they sort of hint at the blurb. Like maybe this book is the ultimate creation of Fyodor. In the introduction, Nabokov says that Fyodor is not a self-insert character, and this is not autobiographical, but you know, it's also kind of hard to believe that when you read it, and if you know about Nabokov and you know about his interest in lepidoptery and his interest in chess and his interest in Russian literature. There's a lot of pleasure to be found here in his discussion of Russian literature. In the 19th century, figures like Pushkin in particular, he really writes about extensively. The scenes of his father and his travels, those are quite indulgently nostalgic in a way that I really enjoy. But it's also a book that's difficult to really grab onto because the perspective is changing. We get changes from third person to first person. The first person voice will shift from Fyodor to other people within the same chapter, and it's not totally clear who is talking, if this is narration, if this is imagined like internal monologue. It's just a little bit, it's intentionally unclear. And, you know, this is another one that was very challenging at times. but I found just as much to enjoy in the gift as I did as I found challenges. And this was definitely a great way to end January. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you all again soon.